Started, we just wanted to give people a few minutes to come on in. Thank you all for joining us today as we kick off our fall seminar series. Today we'll be doing the overview of the AMCAS application process and just what it is to apply to medical school in general. My name is Aminta Kuyete. I am a third-year medical student in the UCSF UC Berkeley Joint Medical Program, doing my master's at Berkeley in anti-racism and medical education. And I will be transitioning in January to UCSF to do my clinical rotations at San Francisco General Hospital with my colleague Haruna, who will be presenting today as well. Haruna, do you want to say hi really quick?
Sure. My name is Haruna, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm also a third year transitioning with Aminta in January. Super excited to be here today. So nice to meet you all.
Awesome. Yes, and I also use she, her pronouns. Thank you for adding that. If you all could drop in the chat where you're from, what year you are in school, it'd be great for us to know kind of when you're planning to apply, because that can help us with the Q&A later. We also have a wonderful fellow who will be helping coordinate the Q&A, Ayumi, she's in the chat. So feel free, as you have questions throughout the seminar, to go ahead and drop them in the chat, and we'll make sure to answer them at the end. Okay, so next slide. There we go. Okay, so this is our team. We are kind of the founding members of our White Coats for Black Lives chapter. We have Camila, Maricon, myself, Fatuma, and Haruna, and we all do lots of different things to support this chapter. We run seminars like you're here right now. We have an Instagram. We have a whole mentoring program. We do outreach programs. There's lots of things that we do. Several of you probably joined in when we did the Tang Center vaccination drive, all of these things. So make sure that if you haven't connected with us before, if this is your first seminar, that you make sure to follow us on Instagram and on Facebook so that you can have access to all of the upcoming events as it's run by this great team. Next slide. We also have several MS2s, so second year medical students who are joining, who are now going to be taking the lead as we move on in our careers. So we have Ria, Justin, Jessica, Kate, and Jessa. They're going to be taking over kind of as we transition out next year. And then next, I'd like to introduce probably the most important people of it all, our fellows. So we have Jasmine, Ayumi, Samhar, and Tyree. They help coordinate everything that we do here and really support the work that is happening. So like I mentioned already, Ayumi's in the chat and ready to help answer questions as we go through this. So with that, that's our team. That's who we are. We'll go ahead and get started. And it's really, we always like to start with kind of our goals and positionality of who we are. So we are a collective of medical students who are underrepresented in medicine and science or have faced disadvantages in our pathway to medical school. And we recognize how difficult it is to get accurate advising and how difficult it is to get the right information tailored for students from diverse backgrounds. So we wanted to do that to start an organization that could really support pre-medical students and strengthen pathway connections across the lengthy pre-med preparation pathway. We know how hard it is to apply. It feels like it's this like a never-ending cycle of despair, but I promise you there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and we're here to help you through it all. So this is our kickoff event for the semester, but there are going to be more, so stay tuned for that. And with that, we'll kick off the agenda for today. You already heard our welcome. We're going to talk about what it takes to plan to apply to medical school, the primary and secondary application. We'll talk about fees. We'll talk about tips and myths. And then we'll have some time for Q&A. And yeah, cool. Next slide. So a lot of people, what I did not know when I was applying is that there's actually two routes to become a physician in the United States. You can go through osteopathic medicine, which is kind of a more traditional medicine with has like additional holistic features, osteopathic manipulation, chiropractic, a lot of different methods are incorporated in that, and that would be a DO. There's also the allopathic medicine programs, which are the MD. So Haruna and I are both in a MD allopathic program, but I have several friends that are in the DO program. And what's interesting is that now they're actually merging the MD and DO residencies. So if you, I don't know, have people heard about this before? Can you drop it in the chat if you have heard about this? It was not something that I was aware of until I was like actually applying, and I was like, wait, what is a DO? What is that? What is the difference? And I just want to be super clear that they are essentially the same in terms of practice, but they just have you learn different things kind of as you start off. Okay, next slide. So for planning, you most of you probably already know about this, but you have to do 1 year of biology with lab, 1 year of physics with lab, 1 year of English, and 2 years of chemistry with lab. You actually don't have to be a science major to do this. I was a psychology major. I was a former community college transfer student, and I ended up doing a post-baccalaureate program, which there's going to be a whole seminar dedicated to what how to apply as a non-traditional student. But all of these, they do take time. So there is a little bit of planning that you have to do in advance to make sure that you know kind of what order you're going to do these things in, right? Because a lot of them are prerequisites. I will say right now, just a quick tip is that if you, and we'll go over this in the letters of recommendation, but you can be really strategic with how you take these classes and which professors you get letters of recommendation for. So for example, I knew that biology was not going to be my strongest section on the MCAT. However, I knew my biology professor was going to be my best friend by the time I finished that semester. So I made sure to become really close with my bio professor to support that area of my MCAT. Just some foreshadowing to some of the things we're going to talk about later. Next slide. Ooh. Hello. Okay. Sorry for the technical difficulties. So this is a great website called the MSAR, which often people, again, have not heard about this. I think it's $28 to $36, depending on what year it is. I think when we did it, it was $28. It might be more now. But it's a website for up-to-date information about each medical school and the requirements that they have. For example, I did not know until I was applying that certain schools require you to have a non-science letter. That was a bit of a mad scramble for me at the end. I hope this, now we're sharing this, that won't be for you. But it's great because it can tell you how many additional courses each school requires. It can tell you their requirements for shadowing. I know, for example, like Georgetown had like a 200-hour minimum of clinical shadowing experience to be eligible to apply. So these are a lot of, there's a lot of like little things on there that you might want to check out to make sure that you're applying to a program that fits your needs, but also that you have checked all the boxes that you need to. Yes, and here it's really great advice to buy that a couple months before applying, just so you can really look over it and make sure. But even earlier in the pathway, I would recommend looking it over just to make sure that you're going to meet all the requirements. Next slide. So yeah, every timeline is every timeline, and everyone is going to be on their own timeline. But generally, you should plan to have about a year to apply to medical school, because you have to take the MCAT, you have to study for the MCAT, take the MCAT, do your primary application, and then you have secondary applications, which will take longer than you could have ever possibly imagined. I thought I was done with my MCAT. I did my primary application. I was like, oh, cool, smooth sailing from here. And then secondaries hit, and I was like, oh my God, what have I done? I'm really burnt out. I didn't plan for this. I don't have time. So I ended up submitting a lot of my secondary applications really late, and then had to interview all the way through April when we had to make final decisions by like April 30th. So don't do that. If you can, please either pre-write your secondary applications, and Haruna will talk about that later, but just make sure that you know that that's ahead. And then you have interviews, and then you have a rolling admissions process. And additionally, there is a deadline, I think by the end of April. I think last year was April 30th. It might have been postponed because of coronavirus, but there is a deadline with which you have to select your schools and decline all of the other schools. And all of you are going to have so many school offers. That'll be such a challenging thing as we go through. Next slide. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about some of the specifics of the primary application. So, and please, again, if you have questions as we're going through this, this is kind of a general overview, but if you have specific questions, please drop them in the chat and we will get to them. This is also recorded and will be posted. So what are the necessary ingredients for a primary application? You have to have all those prerequisite courses that we talked about, extracurricular activities, letters of recommendation, a personal statement, and the MCAT. We're going to talk about each of those components on its own. I think a lot of people put a lot of weight on one area without recognizing that this is all equally evaluated as you go through this process. The MCAT is important as insofar as it's a gatekeeper, in the sense of as long as you get above a certain percentage, it doesn't really matter. We will have seminars on how to coach you on how to study for the MCAT, because I think a lot of it is test taking anxiety. A lot of it is not knowing about free or available resources. We also have a discount with the Princeton Review that we negotiated to give you major discounts to that. So if that's something that you're interested in, please reach out to us and we can connect you with the Princeton Review so that you can get majorly discounted MCAT prep courses. And we can also do, we're going to have some more seminars around personal statements as well. So I'm not going to touch too much on that right now, but we'll go over some of the basics next. So AMCAS is this monster of a website that I did not, again, a lot of this is going to be sharing from our own mistakes. I did not realize how much time that you need to spend submitting your information on AMCAS. You will spend so many hours writing your personal statements and so many hours writing your extracurricular essays and all of these things that you don't realize that you have to then just go into AMCAS and then manually enter in every single thing that you've done. This opens May 1st, and so every year. And so I really recommend that no matter where you are in terms of the MCAT or your letters of recommendation and other things, that you start your AMCAS application on May 1st. The whole thing, if you take nothing else away from the seminar, I really hope that you remember it's so important to apply early, and it's so important to start early for your AMCAS applications. This thing will kind of be a monster if you wait till the last minute to do it, because you have to like enter, like I remember for all of our extracurricular activities, you also had to like put in all of the hours of things that you did. So I had to like go back and look at like timesheets. So make sure that you start this now, that when you're doing things as you're going through and preparing for AMCAS, you're keeping track of these things, keeping a journal or a log. I had an Excel spreadsheet. I highly recommend doing that. So that's AMCAS. Next slide. And so, like we mentioned, they ask for a lot of different things. You need to include your personal information. You have to send in your transcripts, but you still have to manually enter every single class that you've ever taken and every grade that you've ever taken, and how much like the credits were, and if it's changed over the years, and all of this stuff. And this can be really complicated, especially if you kind of were on and off taking classes or taking classes at different institutions. You have to submit them all together. You also have to do your work and activities, your essays, a statement of disadvantage, which we'll talk about in a little bit, letters of recommendation, and choosing your schools. I think there are over 150 medical schools that you can choose. Please do not apply to all of them. Please be strategic in how you're thinking about medical schools. I know that I applied to 35 and that was way too many, because this process does cost a lot of money, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Next slide. So for your work and activity sections of AMCAS, this is going to be your extracurriculars. You're going to enter 15 entries, and you have to be a little bit strategic about how you do this. You're going to have 15 total that you can submit, but then there's going to be 3 that are going to be the most meaningful. So with those, each one will come with a word count, but for the most meaningful ones, you'll be able to enter a little bit more information. I think it's like 3 paragraphs, where each other one you'll only be able to put in like, 13, 1,325 characters, including spaces. So you have to be very brief. Can you go back? I think the slides are moving around. Thank you. So this is important to start now. You can start this at any time. You do not have to wait until the year that you're applying to start writing out your extracurriculars. And a lot of people feel like you have to kind of do the thing of the box checking, where you do all of these different extracurriculars just to make sure that you fill in all of the things. And I wouldn't say that that's necessarily, especially now with coronavirus, I think the medical schools understand that you all have had challenges as you've been applying, and that it's been difficult to get extracurricular activities such as clinical shadowing, especially when like we're medical students and we had to do our anatomy on Zoom. Like there's no way that you could have had that contact or that shadowing experience. So I think they're going to be a little bit more flexible, but definitely start thinking now, if you have some time between now and when you're going to apply, what are some additional things that you could do to fill in your application? I think people undervalue community service, and it's really something that they look for on the admissions side. I have sat on admissions committees now for UCSF, and it's definitely something that we want to look for. Is we want to see what is your commitment to your community? What is your commitment to service? That's definitely important, and different schools value that in different ways. Next slide. One more. Okay, so now we're going to talk about letters of recommendation. These are the things that stress people out a lot. I will say something that was really helpful advice that someone told me when I was starting is that it's literally your professor's jobs to write you letters of recommendation. Like this is part of the job description, especially at an academic research institution. It is their job. It is in their tenure thing. It is in everything that they are supposed to be writing students letters of recommendation to support them in their academic adventures, right? Academic adventures, academic journeys, careers, whatever. So you are required to get 2 from science faculty. We really don't. Berkeley is known for having a lot of these really large classes where you can get letters from GSIs. Ideally, you do want to get a letter from a science professor themselves, but you can definitely have your GSI like co-sign it if you have a really strong relationship with your GSI. And I'm happy to talk with people individually if there's specific cases that you need to work through about like how to ask for a letter. I also recommend that if you are a little bit, if you're a junior or senior and getting ready to graduate, if you have room in your schedule to take one of those quote unquote boutique upper division courses where they're a little bit smaller, where you have more access to the professors, that is a great way to not only prepare you for the MCAT, especially if you want to take like genomics or something in biochem, I think is a great one that's not required, but a really great class to take for the MCAT. That's a great way to get to know a professor, to just kind of go into it knowing, being like, I'm going to get a letter from this professor, I'm going to do well in this class, and it's going to prepare me for the MCAT, and having those goals. So it's optional to have a research advisor or a PI, principal investigator, from your research experience or someone that you've shadowed. But it's also great if you have a long history of community service to get someone from a community organization or from a student group that you ran, and like your faculty advisor. I think it's really important to show the full picture of who you are, which is not just some of your science grades. That's totally not the whole picture of who you are. And that's definitely not the whole picture of who I am. So it was really important for me to also get professional letters and letters from my community service that I did. So definitely be broad in your thinking, but also when you're planning for this, like I mentioned already, I knew that I was not going to do well in my bio MCAT section. I thought I was going to do fine. I didn't think I was going to blow anyone away with my MCAT bio score. So I made sure to get a letter of recommendation from my biochemistry professor and my biology professor, because then they could speak to the fact that I did really well in their classes, even if that wasn't represented on the MCAT. Next slide. Yes, we already talked about this. I think the really important thing to ask is asking directly, do you feel that we have a relationship that through which you can write me a strong letter of recommendation for medical school? I think one of the worst things we hear all the time, and that I've seen actually, is letters of recommendation of like, the student was fine that came to my class. That's not really ideal. And I know that this can be really nerve-wracking and really scary to ask for this, but I'm remembering that it's their job. And hopefully you've had a couple conversations with this professor throughout the course of the semester, because you went into that class deciding this professor is going to be my best friend. I'm going to know all about their kids. I'm going to know about their family, their dogs. I'm going to know everything. And I'm going to ask them questions all the time, not in like an annoying way, but in a like, I'm genuinely interested in you and I want to get to know you. Like going to office hours, that makes a big difference. I had to work all through undergrad, so I couldn't do that all the time. But when I was in my postbac, or when I was taking kind of those upper division boutique courses, I really made sure to build those relationships. And to this day, I still reach out to my letters of my writers, and I let them know like what I'm doing. And we won the Chancellor's Award, and I like reached out to them. I was like, oh, hey, by the way, I did that. And they were really excited to hear from me. So it's great to also just kind of like continue the relationship beyond, because as you get into medical school, which you all will, you're going to need scholarship letters. You're going to need all of these things to help you with different fellowships that you want to do. So it's really important to not only like start these relationships, but to continue them. I think there is the requirements for letters of recommendation is also on MSAR, because the schools are a little bit specific on what each one wants. But generally it's 2 science, 1 non-science is good to ask for. And then you can submit, I believe, up to 8, which I did, which was overkill. And you definitely don't need to do that. But it can be your own journey, however you want to do it. Next slide.
Yeah, we also had a question. Should you already have letters of recommendation ready way before the May 1st, so you're able to just submit it?
I say there's no harm in asking way earlier. I know I did. I asked in like December, because people will forget and you'll have to reach out to them many times. So I started my letter writing and my MCAT prep in January. I started writing my personal statement in November, and I wrote way too many drafts because I was very overwhelmed and I didn't really have guidance and I didn't really know what I was doing. So I definitely recommend asking way earlier, because you don't want to get to the end and be ready to submit June 1st and not have your letters of recommendation. So I think the latest I would recommend asking is like April. I don't know, Haruna, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say that too. And you can, if you end up choosing to go for letters in your undergrad, not undergrad, in your lower division classes that are larger, and it's not the time that you're about to submit yet, you could have portfolios where people used to use that to save their letters of recommendation in one place. And I think the Career Center had a service that might be gone now, but there's different services that are available that we might touch on later as well. Yeah, and I asked for, I think like having more is better if it represents different aspects of you. So it doesn't necessarily help if you have like 5 science letters, So I definitely had one for my boss, because I also worked all of undergrad, had one from a community service center, and then had my 2 science, 1 non-science.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think we use Interfolio. I don't think they have that anymore. And that just tells you how long ago I graduated from Berkeley. But there are different letter writing services. And also, like, some of your professors will just send them directly to you. You cannot submit them on their behalf, but it is nice to, like, say, if to have like a backlog if it's possible for them to do that. So this is just like my story of how I asked for my letters of recommendation and just like what my pathway was. So I kind of touched on this already, but I graduated in 2014 from Berkeley. I had an okay performance on my weed out classes, like couple C's. Chemistry, oh my God, that was not I was not a fan of it. It was not a fan of me. We moved on. That C got my degree. I did good, really well in my upper level biology classes. I'm talking about biochem. I'm talking the other different side classes that I took. I did a lot of several short-term jobs, but also internships over the summers in my undergrad. I took 5 years off. I worked in public health and clinical research at UCSF. I did HIV and substance use. And it's also like, if you have a professor that worked at a specific school, like I had a faculty member from UCSF that I've worked with write me a letter for my UCSF school that I only submitted to UCSF. So you can have some of these extra letters that you also tailor to the individual schools. So I did some of that for some of this research stuff. And then through my informal postbac, that's where I got kind of those boutique letters. And I did that at the UC Berkeley Extension. And like I said, I did not do so well in my chemistry classes, but I nailed it on the MCAT. So I figured I didn't really need a letter from there. That's fine. But for the MCAT sections that I didn't do as well as on, I definitely got the letters there to support that. Next, we're going to go through the personal statement and disadvantage statements really quickly, just so I don't run Haruna out of time. We're going to have a whole seminar on this, but generally, the most important thing about your personal statement, I know it sounds ridiculous when I say it, but is literally answering the question. I have read so many of these personal statements from students who are trying to apply, who want to be really artistic, who want to express themselves, or who are just really anxious about writing it. So they write something really long and really convoluted, and based on the online kind of examples and guidance, end up not answering the question of why do you want to be a doctor? At the end of your first paragraph of your personal statement, I really think that people should have a clear understanding of who you are. 2 to 3 takeaways from your experience of who you are and what communities that you want to serve and why you want to be a doctor. So that if they don't read even the rest of it, which they should, they do. But if somehow they only were able to skim the first paragraph of your personal statement, everyone should have a clear picture of who you are. I recommend having no more than 5 people look at it, because otherwise it'll start to sound like 10 different people wrote it. But really having different people, like someone that you trust, who knows you, someone who knows the process, and then 3 people that you can choose who are a little bit ahead of you in the process, like someone in our White Coats program. Maybe if you join our mentorship program, you can do that, have them read it. I wouldn't recommend paying for it. A lot of people online will offer to take a lot of your money to read your personal statements. There are so many medical students who will do this for you for free, including Haruna and myself. Like, you do not need to do that, but make sure that you give people plenty of time to give you feedback, and be open to people just giving you a quick call and verbally giving you feedback. I think it's a bigger ask to ask for written feedback, but it's really important that you get that as you go through. Next slide. This is really important. A lot of people have a lot of complex feelings about the disadvantage section, but this is an opportunity to indicate whether or not you identify as such. So if you've had to overcome adversity in your life, I talked about having to move 12 times before I was in middle school, and how I never ever took a high school chemistry class because Berkeley High was not interested in replacing our primary teacher. So we watched Mulan every day, but I couldn't tell you a single thing about a chemical structure or a chemical bond. So that really put me at a deficit and a disadvantage for going into college sciences. So if you do not have to do this, but I recommend that people do, because if you have overcome adversity in your life, this is a space to write about it that doesn't feel, you don't have to, if you don't feel comfortable talking about something, do not put it in your application. This is not, it's meant to be an extractive thing. But I really like to frame this as all of the things that you've been through that will make you a better physician for your future patients from underserved communities. Like, I wrote about kind of moving around a lot, being financially insecure, like all of these things that happened in my childhood that are only going to make me a better physician to serve my community as a medical student and as a future physician leader. So I am happy to talk with people more about that, because I really hope that we reframe kind of how we think about this disadvantage section, and as more of a, like, these are all the things that I've been through that are the mosaic of who I am, that have been challenges, and have been supports. That's kind of your personal statement, is the things that supported you. This is an area to write about the things that have been challenging for you and that give the full picture of who you are as a student, but most importantly as a person. Next slide. Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways that they define it. You can define it as being socially disadvantaged, economically disadvantaged, or educationally disadvantaged. I put all three and I talked about them very briefly. You do not have a lot of space to do here, so you do really want to be concise. And again, it's entirely your personal choice to disclose things in this statement as well as in your personal statement. There's this idea that you have to talk about your biggest, deepest trauma in order to be interesting for an admissions committee, and that is not true. You're interesting because of who you are and because of what you have contributed so far and who you are as a person. Like, you do not have to go into all of this if you don't want to. However, it can help you in your application and can help, like I said, create a clear picture of who you are. Next. So my part is pretty long. Sorry, I've been talking for a while. I'll hand it over to her in just a second. But this is really important, like being strategic about which schools you apply to. We'll talk about it, I think, on the next slide about how to select schools, especially based on where you're from. Like, I'm from the Bay Area, I'm from Oakland. I was 100% sure, like, I want to come back to Oakland. I want to serve this community. So to the California schools, that's great because they know that, like, I'm going to stay in California. For some of the East Coast schools, they were kind of like, why do you want to come over here? You have talked, like, you obviously love the Bay Area weather. You know, what is your draw here? And so you have room in your secondary applications to talk about that, but it's just really good from the start to be strategic. I don't think anyone should apply to more than 25 schools. I think if anyone is telling you that, they do not fully understand or comprehend the cost or the time and resources it takes to go into applying to medical school. Especially if you have a solid MCAT score, like, I really don't recommend applying more broadly than that. I would say that's like kind of the broadest. I also wouldn't recommend applying to under 5. Unless you are absolutely certain you will not go to medical school if you don't go to these 5 schools, I would be a little bit broader than that. I think like 15 is probably reasonable. 25 would be the upper limit, just because it costs a lot. But I definitely recommend using this sample strategizer. There's a link that maybe we can drop the link in the chat, just to fill out. And this way you can look at the MSAR. You can, yeah, Haruna's showing it right there. So it has like the city, the state, the AMCAS requirements. Noting that Texas actually has its own separate application process is important. So if you're interested in applying to Texas, they have their own. And putting in the different letters of recommendation that you're sending there, what specific interests are about the school you like. This will also be really helpful for when you're doing your secondary applications. And you can keep, excuse me, you can keep track of where you've submitted, where you've paid, because they will all take your money, and kind of specific things that you want to mention about the school in the secondary applications. Next slide. I've talked about a lot of stuff already, but the last couple things here, and Haruna, feel free to jump in on this, but different schools definitely want you to be from the area. I know that Oregon, like for example, OHSU only takes like 2% of people from outside of Oregon because they really want people who are dedicated to serving the Pacific Northwest community. There are a lot of programs that are starting around, especially around the diversity and inclusion work that is happening right now around in California, Indigenous students and Black identified students. There are new programs that are opening, and also Latina student groups and organizations that are working to increase representation. So like, I know Southern California is really doing that. I know the Bay Area is doing that. Kaiser's opening new medical schools. So just be strategic about where you're from and applying to those schools. But then also, if you're applying to schools that are far away from you, knowing like what your connection to that place is. And they don't really want to hear like, oh, I just did it because like I flipped a coin. When you write your secondary applications, you definitely want to say some specific things about the school that you like. But yeah, Haruna, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I was like, when I was applying, I was like, oh my God, University of Hawaii, like imagine living in Hawaii, but obviously I have no connection there. And my friend, actually, her dad used to live in Hawaii and work there, and so she went there. I think the like career counselors or guidance counselors can be helpful sometimes, not always, for sure. And how I kind of like honed down on what schools to apply to, I had a list and only asked her like, okay, do you know which schools are favorable to out-of-state students? And that one particular question was helpful for me to hear that like Hawaii, you have to be like a person from Hawaii or have a connection, or Pacific Northwest, same thing. For some of the Florida schools that I was thinking of, same thing. And like out of the entire list of schools that I was thinking of, that really helped me cut down to the like 20 something that I ended up applying to. Yeah, and some are faith-based, though it doesn't exclude you from applying. So just noting like going into, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but like going into the website to see exactly what that school is about. And yeah, so I'll bring it back to Anita and go to the next slide.
Yeah, that's such great advice. I think this brings us to our next slide. Like thinking about also, do you want to be there? Like, is how diverse is the student body? You can see on MSAR like how old their student body generally is, the breakdown of the school and what people have done beforehand. If they have a diversity coordinator that you can reach out to, that's definitely something that I recommend, because also you can talk to them about getting fee waivers and things, which we'll talk about later. Thinking about if you want to live in a rural versus urban area versus suburban, that's really important, because if you have lived in a big city your whole life and you want to stay living in a big city, maybe you don't want to apply to that one college way out there in the middle of New Hampshire, which I did. And then I withdrew my application when I realized it was in the middle of New Hampshire, and I was like, absolutely not. So that wasn't for me. And I thank them for accepting my application for interview, but I said no thank you later, which is a bummer because I wasted money, and like that could have been a spot that someone else could have taken earlier. So definitely thinking about that, thinking about the mission of the school, thinking about the student organizations. Like we are a White Coats for Black Lives chapter. Does that school have something like that? Does it have a Latina student association? Does it have an Asian American student association? Like what are the different organizations that the students are doing? And also looking at their student Instagrams, because if there are major issues happening at the schools, like the medical students are running it up, I promise you, and you can really find out about it pretty easily. I don't recommend ever looking at Student Doctor Network. I think it's a nightmare. I only would recommend it doing it for like residency applications, maybe, but it's definitely a place where dreams go to die is kind of how I describe it. However, they do have some helpful stuff on there for looking at different schools and like what students who go there say, but just don't let it discourage you around their admissions requirements and all of those things, because if it was based on Student Doctor Network, I would never get in, and I got into a bunch. So just take it with a grain of salt, and take everything with a grain of salt. I do definitely think that the advice that Haruna gave is really important around like the out of state versus in state, because that tuition is very different. And especially if you're in California and getting in-state tuition, like definitely prioritizing the California schools is important, because you will save hundreds of thousands of dollars. Okay, next couple of slides, and then I'll pass it over to Haruna.
One last thing I wanted to add that's not on this slide is that I think it's also important to think about the money as like, the fees associated with that school. And I remember applying to one school that was recently newly accredited, or like not fully accredited yet because it was just a new school. And because they weren't fully accredited, they didn't have options for federal loans, and they only had private loans. So like the type of loan can be different for different schools based on if they're private, for profit, like new and not not fully accredited. And so I ended up getting into that school, but was like, dang it, I'm not going to go to this school anyway. So why did I even apply? I wasted all that money and time applying anyway. So just really thinking about the costs as well.
That is so important. Also, like for OHSU, that Oregon school that like doesn't take anyone from outside of the state. I have tons of family in Oregon. I spent all my stuff, like a bunch of summers in Oregon growing up. So I wrote about that. They accepted me, and then but I was super late in the cycle. And so by the time they accepted me, they had no financial aid left. So I would have had to take out literally $1 million to go to that medical school. And I was like, thank you so much. Unfortunately, I would have to rob a bank, and I don't think they would let me into medical school after I do that. So like, also the timing is really important. I think there's a couple more slides here, but I just want to make sure that Haruna has enough time to go through everything. So I'm just going to pass it on to you. Just knowing that there's Texas has its own applications, the osteopathic has their own applications, and those open in September, whereas AMCAS opens in May. And then next slide, I think. Yeah, take your time, apply early. You got this. Okay, Haruna.
Yeah, thank you, Amita. I know this is like a lot of information crammed into 1 hour. So if you have questions, like we are always open to answering those by email or, in whatever form. Really quickly, going to go over the secondary application. So this is part of the timeline where, okay, you're done with the primaries, you sent it out, which is that one MCAS application, you chose your schools, and then the MCAS like system reviews it, sends it to all the schools that you chose, and then they evaluate, and then they send you a secondary application. Most of the time, the schools, because of the way the system works, and which is stupid, but they just send you a secondary application anyway because there's a fee associated with it and they just want the money. And so that could be a good thing for you in the sense that you will be, like the schools will be looking at your application, your secondary, which where you can like delve more into who you are and talk more about your interests and, give a holistic view of who you are overall to the school. But it does come with so secondary application, what is it? It's a supplement to the primary application, usually just another set of questions that you have that you need to answer. Some are short answers, some are more longer essays. Some schools also have this thing called a CASPER, which is a 90-minute test on ethics, professionalism, and empathy. I honestly don't think it is a good measure of anything at all, but it is a process that we all unfortunately have to go through. And I think the MCAS VITA, I actually don't know about this, but there's a virtual interview. Amita, can you speak to that? The MCAS VITA?
Never heard of it, but I will Google it right now and get back to you in just a second.
Cool. Yes. So I haven't had to do the virtual interview through MCAS, but usually it's just the secondary, which is the essay prompts, and then the CASPER for some of the schools, which and that if there is a CASPER, it's usually listed on the MSAR. The cost ranges from $30 to $150 for the supplemental secondary application. The CASPER is usually $12. You take one CASPER and then you could send it to all the schools that require the CASPER. Yeah. Okay. And the fees can be waived, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. So the example for the UCSF secondaries from last year, if you wish to update or expand upon your activities, you may provide additional information. So that was one. And then another one was if you were already a graduate, what were you doing in between the time that you're applying and since you graduated? And so I definitely took a gap year as well, which I recommend a lot of everyone doing. I think it's so worth your time, and that's a separate conversation. But I talked about what I was doing. I was working in a clinic and expanded on how like that has also really motivated me and inspired me to become a physician. So tying that in to kind of your theme that you wrote in your primary application, a lot of the secondary questions you can tie back in your big theme that you focused on for your primary application. So my big theme was community service, or going back to the community, working with people in the community. And so kind of tied what I was doing currently in this secondary application to that theme. Things to consider. So when you make your list of schools and that tracker that I showed you earlier, you can make another column that says, okay, when did you receive your secondary application? Okay, another column that says when did you submit your secondary, if there's any deadlines, etc. So, and letters of recommendation sent, how many, and if there is a CASPER. And so you could just add those columns to the medical school tracker that we showed you earlier. And secondary prompts, response organizer. So you could make a whole Google Doc of all the secondary prompts. I, for one, made a Google Doc for each school. And then that helped me, and I just had a Google Drive folder of all the schools, and that helped me kind of see, and have different things in different tabs. And, a lot of the secondary applications, you can reuse a lot and recycle a lot of the content to fit different prompts for different schools, because they're not going to be each school has their own, so that they're not going to be looking at what you sent other schools. And a lot of the prompts are oftentimes the same, like what are you doing between your gap years, or expand on your activities, etc. So you can kind of copy and paste, edit it a little bit, so it's not like necessarily exactly the same, but you can recycle, and really that really helps with the efficiency of trying to get through all the secondaries, because I also struggled a lot.
Really quickly, please edit it before you send it to another school, because I sent some school in Chicago how excited I was to be applying for school in California. So I basically just threw $200 away because I was like, whoops, I copy pasted and did not write the right school. So please make sure that you check that before you submit it.
Yes. please make sure to check. I also almost had that problem, and I was like, oh my God, last minute, I need to change the name of the school at the very least. Yes, advice, steps to do beforehand. Check if the school screens. So again, many secondaries are sent out automatically. I heard from someone at UCSF when I was applying, this is just like, I don't know if this is true, but this is something I heard from a UCSF resident and medical student, and that if your GPA is like from like a 3.3 or like some sort of cutoff, then they don't necessarily look at whether it's a 3.9 or a 4.0 because, and then they just tend to send out secondaries to all of those people. And that cutoff isn't that, I wouldn't say it's not going to be like a 3.8. It's going to be, I think, much lower. So I think that is definitely helpful in showcasing who you are outside of your GPA. If you pre-write your secondaries, it is going to help you so much down the line. I did not, but I think I should have. And so I recommend that you do. It is ideal to return your secondaries within 2 weeks of receiving it, but I gave myself grace to say within 4 weeks of getting it back, and I think that was generally fine. I think there's some schools that are very specific though that say in the email, please return within 2 weeks or 3, and UCSF was one of them. And when I was applying, I had a major crisis because I thought to UCSF because I thought that it was 2 weeks, like already passed. And I was like, oh my God. But then I like calculated wrong and the calendar was off. So I actually had one more week and I was like, oh my God. Anyway, so you don't want to be in my position where you're freaking out in the middle of the night about this. Yeah. And so, yes, pre-write your secondaries. Some of the common prompts, I struggled with finding common prompts. So I just wanted to share that with you. The common prompts are, what have you done since graduating? How will you contribute to the diversity of the class? How have you overcome adversity? Things like that, I think, are very common. And I know Student Doctor Network was not helpful for me at all when trying to find those like common prompts. I just got really overwhelmed with the website. With that said, if you want to look at it, like feel free. Just keep in mind again what Amita said about how sometimes a lot of the things that they say could be overwhelming. So, and oftentimes like not necessarily true. Okay, and aim to submit secondaries by Labor Day, which is September. Or if you get I got secondaries like in October, November sometimes, and then I would just do the 2-week, 3-week turnaround. Okay, be mindful of, yes, copy pasting school names. Don't do that mistake. Spelling errors, deadlines, some are strict, again, like I said, and again, not applying to too many schools. And make sure that for wellness, you make sure to focus on taking care of yourself. Like this is a long process, starting from gathering your letters of recommendation, taking your MCAT, applying doing your primary application, gathering all the information and transcripts, and then doing your secondaries. And then there's still the interviews. Like it is a long process, and it takes a lot of money, first of all, but also a lot of energy. And I just want you to really focus on, making sure that you're doing what you're doing to take care of yourself. I feel like it's easier for me to say, hard to do, because I was definitely stressed during the whole process, but don't stress, like you got it, like you're going to do so great. You're going to have so many secondaries, interviews, acceptances. You're going to have all the medical schools to choose from. And so if you don't get like a response from one school that you're really hoping to get a response from, don't fret, everything will fall into its place. And I know it's easier for me to say that than for the person going through it to like really believe it, because that was me. But I'll say it anyway, and we're all here for you, and we will do this together. Okay, fees and affordability really quickly. So the MCAT, $320 roughly with the rescheduling fee. Primary application is $170 baseline, $40 per school. Secondary application, it's again $30 to $150 per school. It depends on the school. At Casper, it's $12 per baseline. $12 per school to send it out to. You just have to take the CASPER once. And the interviews, it's all technically on you to pay for the housing, transportation, the food, the outfit, like everything. So definitely, I kept a separate Excel spreadsheet of the costs, all the costs associated with my whole application journey, and just to like keep track of how much I was spending. And if I want, for the next school that I got an interview for, I'm like, okay, do I really want to spend another like $150 plus the flight cost plus everything else to like attempt to go to this school? Maybe not, especially once you already have acceptances too, then you can really like, I feel like, start deciding really whether or not you want to interview at that school or not. But there is a fee assistance program, so that waives the fees, but you have to apply for it before registering for the MCAT or submitting the MCAS application. And I don't know, I think there's certain like income requirements that you have to meet to be eligible to apply. I don't exactly remember what the cutoff was, but I think it should be on the AAMC website. If you look it up, you could just type in fee assistance program AAMC and it should come up on Google.
Yeah, just to interject really quickly, it's really hard to live in California and qualify for this because just the cost of living in California is so high that it's like something like twice the federal poverty rate is what will get that. But if you don't, if you don't qualify for it, don't be discouraged, because you can just email schools directly and say the cost of your secondary fee is prohibitive for me to be able to apply to this program. I'm really interested, blah, blah, blah. A lot of them will just waive the fee for you directly. I wish I did that more. I figured that out halfway through it. And then like I got like, they basically saved $1,000 by just sending an email. So I highly recommend doing that.
Wow, yeah. I did not know about that either. So thanks to Mita for sharing. And some other funding resources, you could always get different discounts and free resources as a pre-med student through some of our events. I know we have given away scholarships and the MCAT Kaplan guide. And other pre-med clubs also do similar things as well. You can ask schools for assistance. That's literally just what Aminta said. Alumni associations can also be helpful for different scholarships and funding. Our white coats, we have funding, like we said, and also student hosting programs. So when I did interviews, I definitely, could not afford to pay for all of the lodging all the time. So I had, and they send you an email about like if you wanted to be linked up with a current medical student, and I would stay in their apartment for the night as I did the interview. And it was actually really nice. When I interviewed in Ohio, the person that hosted me took me to a pumpkin patch and a apple picking orchard, and it's like, this is what we do in Ohio. And I was like, well, I realized then, I was like, I did not want to live in a rural area. Anyway, so yeah, could be a nice experience as well, meeting other medical students. Okay, so last thing in the last like 3-4 minutes, tips and myths. Feel free, Amita, to hop in if you want to, but tips, make spreadsheets to centralize the info, like I said, for what schools you're applying to, have columns on the deadlines, etc. Have a separate spreadsheet if it's helpful for you to keep track of your expenses. That's what I did. Resources, you could use Student Doctor Network, with the caveat that sometimes it's not helpful. I use Student Doctor Network actually to look at some of the interview questions that people had posted, that were like, they had like a list of like, oh, challenging questions from this school or something, and I would like look through that to see if I could be prepared more to answer those questions. But that's all I used Student Doctor Network for. So yeah, Reddit and Twitter. I didn't really use Reddit and Twitter, but I heard it's helpful from some folks. And again, you can apply more than once. It's a long process, so make sure to take care of yourself. And again, yeah, please stay kind to yourself. And we are all here for you throughout the process. And myths. You don't have to be a science major. You don't have to do research. I hated research. I only did it in the summer. I also didn't have time to do research because I was working part-time during undergrad. Don't need a heavy course load each semester, definitely not. You definitely do not have to have a 4.0 GPA. That you don't even have to have like a 3.6 GPA. No. You don't have to apply right after your third year. Taking a gap year is so helpful for your well-being, but also for your experiences in life and learning about everything outside of being a medical student. You don't have to do medically related things during your gap year. You can do something totally different. You also don't have to apply to 30 plus schools. Again, I think what Amita said is right on about, 15 to 20 is a good number, 25 on the very high end. You don't have to do it alone. We're all here for you. We're happy to, edit your personal statements, answer any questions. If you have any questions, or, we're happy to give you advice as well. You can get paid for research. That is a big thing. I definitely did not get paid for research, and would have definitely wanted to. So I think that's also a big limitation for a lot of folks, because I was needing to work part-time, but if I had been getting paid for research, that could have been my part-time job. Anyway, but make sure you I don't know how to necessarily advocate for this in a good way. I don't know if Amita, if you have experience with this, but yeah. And then you can do a postdoc as well, which I know Amita can speak to.
Yeah, I think those are all amazing, Haruna. And I think that like people would say these things and pre-med things that I would go to, and I'd be like, yeah, that's fine. But like, I have to have a 4.0, I have to do this. And I promise you, if these things were true, I would not be in medical school right now. So it's not just like, it can feel a lot of the times people were just giving you a lot of advice and information, but it's like really easy for us to say it. And I think Haruna said this beautifully earlier of like, it's easy for us to say it now, even though we were so stressed out. We were just so stressed out right now trying to figure out our rotations for next year and what order we're doing things and if I can do surgery first. So it's like recognizing that there will be a lot of ups and downs emotionally on this pathway, and that it's okay to feel that kind of panic and stress about it, but just try not to let it overwhelm you, because a lot of that is external things that aren't necessarily giving you the correct and accurate information about what is necessary to get into medical school or how you can be most successful for you as an individual. And so that's just why we wanted to do this seminar. We're going to launch a poll right now. Please fill out the poll. It is really helpful for us to know kind of how this seminar went, but also for us to report to Cal Central. It should have popped up for you all, to report back to Cal to keep giving us money to be able to do things like this and to be able to put on our scholarships and put on support our fellows and what they and how they are able to contribute to this work. So I really just wanted to wrap this up by saying, if no one has said it already, that we believe in you and we believe that you are going to be the physicians that are going to change the world someday. And we cannot wait to be your colleagues on rotations. Maybe we'll be the residents teaching you how to do intubations and stuff, because her and I are both interested in emergency medicine, and that would be so cool. Please reach out to us. We have a lot of advice. We've done a lot of trial and error, and we really wish that really hope that we can help you as you go through this. So thank you all for coming. And I see that there's some questions in the chat. I know that I have to leave right at 11. So we'll just try to do some of these pretty quickly.
Someone just emailed me one earlier, and they said, if you did various types of research but did not like them, would you still recommend putting them in one box for the activity section to check off the checklist?
I did summer research and I did separate things. So I did 2 different summer research stuff just for the summer, just and I did it as 2 separate boxes. But if you do have research experience, even though you didn't like it, if you already did it, like, might as well write about it, right? So I would definitely say add it into your experience box.
And
yeah, I think
question, go ahead.
Go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, in addition to the question, I think the person asked, for the activity section, did they get 15 in total? So would it be like 15 activities and 3 other like meaningful activities?
No, of your 15, 3 of them are going to be your most meaningful. So you only get 15 altogether. And I definitely think that like there's ways, a lot of people don't have all 15. I had to cut down, like it was because I had done so many things in my gap years, but I definitely think get the credit for the things that you did. You never have to do research again after, but like definitely put it there, because that schools like that kind of stuff if you have that. Cool. Next question.
Yeah, Alice said, are there ways to advocate for yourself as a student with a low GPA or a low MCAT, like by speaking to admission counselors?
Yeah, I definitely recommend reaching out and building relations. Like if you know that your numbers aren't necessarily in alignment with like the school, reach out to the admissions, I don't like admissions officers or diversity officers, like, and just like get to know them. Like go to the virtual, all the fairs are virtual now. So you can just kind of like log in and like build relationships with people and just like email them and ask for an office hour. It is literally their job to recruit you to come to their medical school. So I definitely think there's ways that you can advocate. I know that in my in interviews being prepared to talk about it, because I had a professor be like, you got a C minus, you got a C in chemistry. How do I know that you're smart enough to do medical school? And I just wanted to like flame on. That was a horrible experience. I did not go to that school, but like being able to like be confidently and say like, I know that that C is not reflective of my academic capabilities, and I can do so many other things, and that's not who, like a whole picture of who I am. And here are all the other ways that I've contributed to academics in the field of research and all of these other things. So like being able to talk and speak confidently about kind of your GPA and all of those things, I think is really important. Harina, if you have anything.
Yeah, and also if one particular grade in that one class doesn't really, it's really not like a big thing. And they really like to see the trend also. So, like if you're improving in your classes later, not that the GPA is everything, it's not like, it is definitely not everything. And they like to see the trend. So if you improved in your junior and senior year, even though you got a C in your sophomore year or something, they're like, oh, we like to see that. That shows growth in a different way. If that didn't happen with your GPA, that is okay too. But just wanted to put that info out there. And I see another question really quickly about if you apply to out-of-state medical schools, do you have to do the interview in person? I don't really know with COVID how things are now, but when we were applying, yes, we had to go to that place. And so for one interview in New York, I was like, this is an excuse for me to go to New York. But then everything else, I'm like, oh my God, so much money, flying out the window. So really think about, again, the cost associated with what you're going through.
Yeah, and I did a thing where I got a credit card, a travel credit card for one that had no interest for 1 year. And this is something like another med student like mentioned to me. And so I put all of my things on that credit card, used all the points immediately because like you get these bonuses if you spend a certain amount of money in a certain amount of time. And then I paid that all off with my first scholarship. So technically the school paid for me to get flued out to all these other schools. That is a little bit risky, but it was a way. I was like, there's no way that I could have afforded it otherwise, because there's just not a lot of funding. Schools can give you discounts on like stays, but a lot of times like for travel and flights. So that's just another thing to consider as you're like applying. There's plenty of wonderful med schools in California. There's plenty of wonderful medical schools everywhere that like you could definitely apply all in state and be successful, but just something to think about.
I know it's 11:02, so wanted to put that out there for folks who need to leave. And I know we'll have more of these different sessions for different things like the interview process or the more deeply into the personal statement process. So definitely there's going to be time to ask questions there. And I'm also happy to stay on for a couple more minutes to answer those. But I know, Amita, if you have to go, feel free to.
Yeah, there's one question in particular.
Just sorry, Amy, really quickly. Sorry. I'm gonna head out. Thank you all so much for coming and staying and for filling out the poll. This is so important for us. Thank you to Haruna. Thank you to Ayumi. We really appreciate everything that y'all have contributed, and we hope that you like the session, and there will definitely be more. So Ayumi, if you want to go ahead and spotlight yourself, I'm gonna dip out. Okay.
Okay, yeah.
Bye, Amita.
Bye. Yeah, the question here is, let me scroll up to it. It's a question for the disadvantage statement. They heard that even though you may be socially disadvantaged, for example, LGBTQ+, and have experienced stigma and pressure on your mental health, if it has not affected your journey in medicine, or access to education or opportunities, it should not be listed. Could you confirm this?
I would say if it has really significantly impacted your life in some way, I think it would still be helpful to write about it. Yeah, and yeah, I think like, and also like not to like play the game, but I think you could spin it in a way where I would say if it has really significantly impacted your life, then you should still write about it. And that's just my personal standpoint on that, because you really do want to showcase who you are as a person, right? And this statement is a way to showcase who you are, and the adversities that you had to go through. Um, yeah, so that's just my personal standpoint. And I also don't know exactly, like, I can't really confirm whether or not that's true, what they were saying. But we can get back to you on that. And hopefully in the personal statement seminar that we'll have later in the semester, where we'll talk more into deeply about the disadvantage statement there, we can talk a little bit in depth about that. Sorry, I can't be as helpful about that question.
Yeah, definitely will make sure to circle back on that. But if there are no other questions, I think we can end the session. Thank you all so much for tuning in and for filling out the poll. And you can view this recording on our YouTube channel. I can send that in the link right now.
Thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And again, we're all in it together. So yeah, we're here for you and you got this. Have a good week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to stop the poll.